So Tom really does take a nap back there.
Yeah, I mean, he's got the teddy bear, and that's also why it smells like bacon.
Oh. So Joe, what are you doing here?
Somebody probably burned the fish casserole up on the PM pit again.
No, I'm just looking for a quiet corner to update the NTA roadmap on THWAC.
Oh, that's right. It's in RC now, right?
Yeah, I've been running it for a while. It's pretty amazing.
Okay, so my dev environment's stuck in approval hell to get the upgrade to SQL 2016, so I gotta ask, is it worth this much hassle?
Totally worth it.
Oh, it's absolutely worth it. I mean, think about all the new technology support, right? Azure, IPv6, Palo Alto firewalls. You can also show NetFlow from a local source, right? So if you want to get people up and running on the team, maybe that are new to NetFlow, you can do that just right out of the box. We released a bunch of NetFlow free tools. They're absolutely going to love that. So why don't we do this? Let's walk through, I mean, we've been talking about some of the classic NetFlow use cases for years on lab at this point. Why don't we walk through some of those and show how they're easier to do, they're sort of quicker to get started with using those new features, sort of remap those new features into those classic use cases.
Perfect. And meanwhile, I'm going to have to get on IT's case to get this SQL upgrade going. I'll get it done.
2016 is worth it.
Okay. So I think the best way to roll through this is to first talk about those big technologies that we can just talk over. So let's start off with Azure. Why did we do that? What's that all about?
So the Azure support is designed to give people another option to deploy into the Azure environment, and also to be able to consume and support the native Azure SQL database service.
Okay.
Right, and it also means that you don't have to install that separate flow storage engine in another VM. So it eliminates the need to set up a separate container for that.
Okay, great. And it continues with the idea of supporting RDS and all of that.
Exactly.
Fantastic.
Choices.
Now, I have had an unrequited love for IP version 6 for a long time, something like 2 decades. So why now? What's that?
So IPv6 is starting to become a reality for a number of our customers. So education customers, large distribution customers, some of our federal government customers are all actually rolling out and deploying now. And they need visibility to the other half of the traffic in their network.
And so is that IPv6 for the sender and the collector as well?
That's right. So we're able to consume IPv6 flow records, also to consume IPv6 over an IPv6 endpoint.
Pretty handy if you're dual stack by default and you're using NetFlow as a security tool to actually look at traffic and oops, we are emitting IPv6 on that interface.
Absolutely.
Now I know that we're going to see a lot of our UX improvements as we go through the rest of these demos. We're going to see where things have been tweaked and stuff like that, but it sounds like we've been working really hard with our UX team to make that happen.
We have. We've built an epic for UX improvements. The UX team has actually been interviewing customers about things that annoy them about NTA. We've been adding those stories into that epic, and we've been working through those kind of one by one. And so we've delivered about 10 of those kind of minor improvements over the last 2 releases.
The usability buddies have been busy.
I'm glad you said that. I don't think I could have.
I can't always get it right.
All right, so we were joking about the SQL 2016, but I think it's worth mentioning again that we have deprecated the 2012, that you really need to be moving to 2016 as fast as you can.
Right, and I mean, you've had the option for a while to actually maybe run an earlier version, but you didn't get all the features. This is the first time that we've said, look, you really do need to be on 2016, and it's simply because Column Store Database is allowing us to check off so many of those top requested feature requests. So when you go to for example, the what are we working on now page in THWAC, since this one is in beta currently, it should be in RC shortly, but when you look at what we're releasing, we are able to now start accelerating the releases for features for NTA, due in large part to that move to 2016.
Right. Okay, so there's one really amazing and sort of work-changing feature, which is in support of Palo Alto. Now you can see how a configuration change affects a flow. Can we take a look at that?
Absolutely. So let's take a look at the node details page for one of the Palo Alto firewalls here. And you'll notice that on the slide out, there's a number of new options here, including an option to take a look at the policies that are configured on this particular box. So let's take a look at the list of the policies that we have. If we look at the policies that we've collected from the configuration of the device, if we zoom in on those, there's a couple different ways to filter those and to sort those. Let's zoom in on one of those and take a look at the policy details page. On the policy details page, one of the things that we'll see, which is contributed by NTA, is a top conversations on policy. And this particular widget shows us the conversations that are directly related to a particular policy. So the impact of this is that if I want to make changes on that policy, I can see which conversations are affected immediately.
I love the way this extends. I mean, for policies are never in production, end up being what you thought they were when you were imagining that ideal policy, right? And so, like with tuning CPQoS, right? Mm-hmm. You have to be able to watch the traffic, the sort of cause and effect as you tune it over time. And the idea of using NetFlow as a way of, let's say, perfecting policies, but actually optimizing them in a real-world environment makes that process a lot faster.
It's make a huge difference for a lot of the folks who are using this right now. Is it's that safety check when you're planning out your change controls.
Absolutely.
So I think I really want to hear about this local source. This is something pretty revolutionary. How did we come up with it? What is it? I want to take a look at it.
Okay. So the local NetFlow source came about as a result of the experience that most of our customers have when they trial this software. Usually they'll install it, they'll navigate to the NTA homepage.
No data available.
No data available. Miserable experience. Right. So we want to be able to put some data in there.
Well, so this installs sort of by magic on the collector. So wherever there's a collector, it's set up.
Right.
And then is it enabled by default? Or
so
turned off?
For new installations, it's going to be installed and enabled by default. For upgrades, it's going to be installed but disabled by default. You can go in and turn it on if you want to use it.
So there's a switch, you could turn it on and off, and so like while you're testing, you turn it on, and then when you start driving a lot of traffic, you want to make sure you maybe decrease one more, cut off one more sender, you just turn it off and you're good to go.
Give you some choices about where your sources
So
come
does it
from.
and it just looks like anything else in the interface?
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay, well, I want to see it.
All
What
right.
does it look like?
Well, let's take a look at it. So let's take a look at NetFlow sources over here. And one of the things you'll see that you haven't seen before is a NetFlow source with a little Windows logo next to it.
I've never been so happy to see that logo.
I have to tell you, it's pretty exciting. So local NetFlow source here. Not much traffic on this right now. This is a lab machine. But you can click into that source and you can see traffic that is unique to your particular machine, which is kind of cool.
So when we say this is unique to the machine, this is actual NetFlow coming off of the interface on the polling engine itself.
That's right. So what we've done is we've taken all of the interfaces on that machine, we have combined them into a virtual interface. So what you're going to see is traffic that is sourced from or destined to this particular machine.
So it just looks like ingress, egress on any other interface.
Exactly. So one of the questions that this answers that's really interesting is, tell me about my network management traffic. A lot of customers ask the question, what kind of network management traffic am I driving? SNMP, flow, that sort of thing. This gives you the ability to actually see what that looks like.
Especially for a distributed collector.
Right. So to be able to enable or disable this particular source, you'll go into Manage Sources here, and you've got a simple checkbox here. For your Windows interface, you'll be able to enable that or disable that with the checkbox.
And if you had sFlow or JFlow sources, they show up here too.
Absolutely. So some of the UX improvements include easier navigation options right up here, so you'll be able to select the time period. At this point, you can select ingress or egress, and if you want to filter based on IPv4 or v6 traffic, you can make that selection here. One of the things you'll see is some IPv6 traffic here in our conversations. You'll be able to see the addresses that are involved in those conversations.
Nice.
That's cool. Great. And so basically, while you were adding the selector for v4 or v6, you went ahead and redesigned that selector in general.
Exactly. And you'll also see that in the Flow Navigator here. So an IP version selector is here in the Flow Navigator as well.
So the thing that's really interesting about local source is that this data is almost personal. I mean, I know what my polling engine is doing, so when I look at this NetFlow data, it's familiar. Right?
Yeah, it's interesting that you should say that. When we had the conversation with the development team about first developing this feature, we were trying to solve the problem that new customers have when they try to evaluate the NTA software. That is, they install it, they navigate to the NTA homepage, and they see no data. And so over the evaluation period, they're required to go and try to enable flow data from an external source that they may not have control over. So what we wanted to be able to do was to give them a sense of how the product worked. And I asked the development team if they could pick up flow data from the local interface of the server. So we took a weekend trip. We went out, did some team building. We came back, and some of the senior developers dropped me off and said, hey, we need to go into the office. They went in on a Saturday afternoon. They were there again on Sunday. On Monday, they came and they sat me down. And they showed me a machine that they had installed with a local NetFlow interface enabled. And they said 3 things to me. The first thing they said to me was, I've worked on this product for a long time. When I first turned this on, it changed the way that I thought about the product. And I thought, that's pretty cool. The second thing they said to me was, I know what's running on my server, the observation that you made. I know exactly what's generating this traffic. This data that I'm looking at is personal to me. I know where it comes from. And the third thing they said to me was, I can't believe we haven't done this before, which I had to agree with, right?
One of the things I love about that story too is, about it being personal is that there's a parallel, I think, also with IPAM in a way. Like I sort of learned IPv6 by using the interface to define IPv6 subnets in IPAM. So I kind of, the tool helped me understand better how IPv6 actually worked. And so in this case, we all know, or I think if you're watching this episode, you know NetFlow is extremely valuable. But you're not sure exactly how. Like you're going to have to learn how to interpret it, how to read the NetFlow tea leaves. And so looking at data that you know by heart that is personal, you can map your understanding of that traffic to the charts, to the breakouts, to the reports, and then you can take that and extrapolate it to all of the other nodes on your network.
Exactly right. So that kind of emotion is, I think, what was the impetus behind the free tools also. We just want to make IT folks' lives better, even when we release a tool that is free, like puppies and beer.
Yeah, sort of NetFlow Logger.
NetFlow Logger.
That was awful.
That's terrible.
It was good. I want to drink it now, though. All right, so let's talk about NetFlow, the free tools. What are they? What do they do? Like, what's that all about?
Okay, so the free tool bundle includes a NetFlow replicator, a NetFlow generator, and a NetFlow configurator.
And for those of you who might have worked with maybe support in some other areas and been part of betas, you might have heard us talking about some of the internal test tools that we use. And this actually came from the code that we developed internally to do high rate flow replication and some other things where we needed to actually send NetFlow to 10 different destinations, not just 2.
That's right.
Like a lot of our great ideas, we were solving a problem for ourselves, and then we just kept on helping other people solve the same problem. So there's 3 of them, right?
There's 3 altogether. So the replicator, we added an interesting feature to that allows you to sample the traffic that you forward. So some folks are looking at that as something they can deploy remotely, then they can reduce the traffic that goes over a WAN link, or maybe comes out of a public cloud environment.
Or you can enable sampling from the sender, so you can sort of convert it.
That's right. So the replicator allows you to send to multiple destinations. Some folks are using that to send to their production NetFlow platform plus a security tool to be able to do security investigations kind of on the fly.
Nice. Okay, and what's the next one?
So the next one is the generator, and the generator basically simulates sources of NetFlow traffic. So that allows you to describe where the traffic is coming from, and it'll simulate that source of NetFlow traffic. It allows you to describe the endpoints that are involved in the conversation, and then the type of flow that you're getting. And folks are using that to verify things like their firewall rules, and make sure their firewall rules are configured correctly end to end. They're also using that just to verify that they're getting flow at their collector, and they can see data come up and run.
And that'll spoof the IP of the transmitter so it looks like a regular transmitting node, and then your endpoint data actually lines up with interface data.
Exactly.
Nice. And the last one?
The last one is configurator. It's a very simple tool that we have rewrapped. It's one that we have released a number of years ago. It's a very simple configuration tool for NetFlow version 5. So for iOS-based devices, Cisco iOS-based devices, we'll go in, we'll configure NetFlow version 5, get that up and running immediately. If you want a more sophisticated configuration management capability to be able to set up NetFlow across all of your devices, then NCM is your ticket.
I have a feeling that you've talked about this before because I'm looking at the screenshots here.
Right.
This slide, what's this logo in the upper right-hand corner and swug down here? So you've been talking about this at SolarWinds user groups.
We have. So, and we'll be talking about it at the user groups through the remaining part of the year as well. So Customers are reacting very positively to having a set of test tools in their environment. They really like that. And we're enthusiastic about getting those out to as many customers as possible.
Great.
And then I was going to say, you're also working on the documentation now for the support center as well.
That's right.
So that if you go out to support.solarwinds.com, you'll be able to get lessons, how-tos, and everything else for these new features soon-ish.
Right.
And the link to pull down these free tools is in the show notes, and you'll be able to pick those up everywhere. Just look up SolarWinds free FlowTools bundle, and you'll be good to go.
The FlowTools bundle is one of my favorites.
All right, yes. All right, moving on now. What's the next thing that we have to talk about?
Okay, so we've covered new, we've talked about UX, we've talked about some of the foundation component changes. Let's go back over some of those classic use cases that all of you deal with on a regular basis. The whole point of why you're using NetFlow to analyze traffic and how they're different using some of the enhancements in this particular release.
Fantastic. All right, let's start with the absolute classic Bandwidth Hogs.
I think I got an email on that. Okay, but to be fair, it is the canonical example of what NetFlow, like it is the 80-20 rule of what you will do with NetFlow. My interface is pegged, what is pegging that interface?
Fair enough.
So the usual workflow that we use to investigate bandwidth hogs is a very reactive flow. We get a help desk ticket, we see high volumes on a particular interface, and we go and we investigate what's going on in that interface. Now, after we've done that a couple of times, it would be really cool to be able to set an alert and to get on a more proactive basis for some of these bandwidth hogs that we're seeing in the environment. So let's take a look at how we would normally walk through a bandwidth hog investigation. So our application data down here may be in our top 10 applications. We may be able to see volumes in our top 10 applications here. Let's take TLS, SSL, port 443 web traffic as an example.
Okay.
Let's see where this particular volume of traffic is visible. It's visible on our own local NetFlow interface. It's also visible on our Palo Alto box on this interface. So let's drill into that and take a look at that. So in the details page here for this particular application, one of the things we're seeing is HTTP protocol. We're seeing it as it traverses through this particular node on this particular interface. And then we've got our application view down here. That's enough context for us then to be able to create a flow alert.
A flow alert. So that's completely new in this version?
That is completely new in our last version.
Right.
We're starting to see customers actually deploy that into production now.
And that's the primary reason for going to SQL 2016, because that gives the performance for the back end to be able to do these queries on traffic banks.
Right.
So we've had the capability for some time to be able to alert on the total aggregate volume of traffic on a particular interface. What's new is our ability to pick out an individual application and describe a threshold for that application's traffic and alert on that.
Okay, so how do we set that up?
So the new box here, the Create a Flow Alert box, summarizes for us that the alert's going to trigger on flow data that we're getting from this particular Palo Alto device on this interface. We've got the ability to customize the alert name a little bit, so we could call that Leon's favorite alert.
But you got to put an exclamation point at the first.
Absolutely.
Sorted right to the top. Yeah.
We can select the severity for that particular alert, so we can look and set the severity at serious. And then we've got a couple of different trigger conditions here. So the classic bandwidth hog is application traffic is going to exceed a particular threshold. We're looking at ingress or egress traffic here. So we can pick ingress or egress. Traffic that is greater than a particular volume here. This is a lab instance. It's very low traffic, but we've got the ability here to go ahead and type in a static value here and then select the unit. The alert's going to look over the last 5 minutes to make sure that we're looking at an average of traffic over the last 5 minutes. And then we can either create the alert immediately, in which case it's just going to log. We can go back, look at it in the logs, or look at it in Log Analyzer if we're sending alerts to Log Analyzer, or we can open it in the Orion Alert Wizard. Now when we do that, what we're going to see in the Alert Wizard is that we've already jumped to step 7 of the Alert Wizard. All of this stuff is pre-populated already, But if I wanted to go back, for example, and attach a trigger action,
Right.
if I wanted to add an email alert or something like that, I could do that
or an
here.
actual configuration change, or, I mean, you can be very, very, not reactive, but programmatic about how you handle some of these alerts.
One of the bandwidth hogs that people diagnose on a repeated basis is running backup traffic in the middle of the day. So if I wanted to add a time of day filter here, this would be the place to do it. And then I'd be able to specify a schedule here. So when I jump to summary for this particular alert, I'm ready to go.
The SWICL.
There's the SWICL that actually generates the alert. This alert would be immediately triggered on 0 objects at this point, right? And then I can go ahead and submit that, and I've created my new alert.
Perfect.
Well, what I really like about this, though, is that you can start to use social engineering for remediation with this, right? Because, you know, the old joke we always made about if you ACL out YouTube, no one will sit with you at the cafeteria at lunch, right? So being able to do, say, for example, if like the top remote offices by YouTube traffic, being able to send a targeted email to that office that says, congratulations, your branch is now #1 in YouTube viewership for today.
Ooh.
And then you watch it fall off again, right? So then you can actually use that traffic mix data to do kinder remediation using social engineering as well. And so often you want to be able to use that kind of burst bandwidth or unused bandwidth on an interface when it's available, but otherwise make sure that you can adjust it back down. And so that's something that's another great reason to do the 2016 upgrades, to be able to get this kind of behavioral-based alerting.
I love that.
So this leads to something that was really hard to do before. Can we go back to the NetFlow application details page?
Right.
So over here, where you would have set when the flow is greater than a certain amount, you can set it for when flow is less than a certain amount. And what that means is that you can monitor for the absence of something. So when I have an application where I'm expecting a certain volume of traffic, I'm expecting Active Directory traffic, I'm expecting application flow traffic, and all of a sudden it disappears, I can catch that here, right?
Exactly. By direct observation. So what we'll do is we'll go in and set this to less than or equal to, and then specify a volume here. And so that could be a very low volume, right?
It just needs to be a trickle.
Yeah. So that could be less than or equal to 1K. It's going to check it over 5 minutes, and then you can create an alert and generate an alarm based on that.
I think that's something that's going to be very useful for a lot of folks as well.
This was actually one of the primary use cases for being able to do per application alerting. This was the thing that people were most interested in because they weren't aware when their application went off the air.
So you could also use it because you can generate reports off of this data.
That's right.
You could also see, are my backups running? Because if you have a day where that expected backup traffic didn't happen, then you'd be able to have a page that actually showed days completed and where that traffic was seen.
And you'd be able to notify someone to remediate that immediately.
So in between knowing when something has gone too high and knowing when something has gone too low, there's this other weird class of traffic that might be present, but only in small amounts because it actually wants to get lost in the noise.
Forbidden needle in the haystack.
Yeah, it shouldn't be there, but it might be, right?
So port 0 traffic is a good example of that.
So port 0, that's completely impossible. Nothing could ever
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Port 0.
So port 0 traffic, the ability to monitor port 0 traffic was an ask from one of our ISP customers. And it's either horribly misconfigured communication stack, or more often it's malicious traffic.
Okay, and so you can monitor that and know when it exists at all, because that's a red flag.
Exactly.
Okay,
So if you ever see it in the traffic flow, I want to know immediately.
Bad things are happening. So let's take a look at how to find that traffic. So the way that we find this traffic is we'll go ahead and use the flow navigator to set the context for where we want to see this particular traffic. So we'll look at a detail view here for a particular interface. This is the interface for a device that faces the public internet. And then we'll take a look at the application that we're interested in searching for. And in this case, that's our port 0 application. One of our UX improvements was to go ahead and alphabetize this very long list of applications. You can actually start typing and get to the application that you're interested in. But in this case, it's a lot simpler. Port 0 is port 0. We'll type it in 0 here. We'll add that filter, and then we'll go ahead and submit.
Tell me that's generated data.
This is generated data,
Okay, good.
fortunately, right? But there's a lot of interesting information on this particular screen. You can see that we're looking at port 0 traffic on this particular interface and this device, application port 0 only, right? But we see a number of different endpoints here, a number of different conversations.
Which you would expect if there was scanning activity.
Exactly.
This is what evil on your network looks like.
Yeah, so once we have this context here, then we can go ahead and create a flow alert. And again, we have the summary up here, the data that we're seeing on this particular interface, the alert name, so we could call that malicious port 0 alert. It's a pretty serious thing if we see this at all, maybe critical. And then we can set a relatively low threshold here for ingress traffic. So let's say something like 5 kbps.
Because you might expect
presence of traffic at all.
Because you might expect every IP address, especially in this case with the firewall example, is getting scanned all the time. You're looking for a targeted attack.
That's right. That's right.
And one of the things I like here too, I mean, you know, we use for NPM we use percstack a lot to sort of visually put together the data that represents a real issue, right? So you have sort of the customer issue across the top, or the affecting issue across the top, and then root cause eventually somewhere in that stack. So it's the same thing here with this with the flow wizard, right? Because you are actually building out a visual representation, going back to this is personal data that I understand, and saying, yes, I want an alert on this. So it allows you to visually confirm the source of the data that's tied to the alert.
So when I create this particular alert, maybe I want to do a notification, for example, to my security folks.
Yep, definitely.
So for the last trick, for the last demo, how about traffic that we don't have right now? So we don't have any examples or context, but we know it probably could pop up later, and we really just want to know as soon as so we can shut it down.
So how about Dropbox traffic?
There we go.
But that's a great example of when I really think we ought to talk about NetFlow as a security and governance feature. Because if you want to say, we have a policy, thou shalt not run Dropbox clients on your machines, watching that at the firewall is a really handy way to figure out where they are and then immediately identify the endpoint and go have a conversation about it.
And saves the work from trying to monitor the entire surface of the bubble, every device. So it's a much more efficient way. All right, so how do we go about monitoring a thing that doesn't exist right now?
So let's start by creating a custom application.
Okay.
So for that, we'll go to the settings page here, all settings. And we'll take a look at product-specific settings for NTA. What we're going to do is to create a group of IPs that this traffic is sourced from or destined to.
Okay.
And then we'll use that in our definition of a custom application.
Okay, so there's a little bit of work here because we're going to have to find every IP address for Dropbox.
That's right.
Or the range.
Or the range, right. But you know, you only have to do that once. So we happen to have looked this up. So the IP address that we got was 162.125.248.1.
So let's add a new group. And we'll call this Dropbox. And our address range here, we'll go ahead and type that in. And we'll just enter a single address here. So that is also 162.125.248.1. Okay. And we can enable this to be present in the top 10 IP groups resource if we want to. We'll go ahead and add that. Actually, we don't need that one. So we've got this one in here. We'll hit OK. And then we'll enable that. We'll go ahead and hit Submit.
And in this case, you're actually creating an IP group for a remote address, but you could do that for internal addresses as well.
Absolutely.
Right. So if you don't want traffic from one section of your environment to another section of your environment, this is how you could go about setting it up.
Or you just want to categorize it, effectively get a tag on it.
Right.
Exactly. Right. So now we have the group. Now we'll use the group in the creation of a custom application. So let's take a look at application service ports here. And what we'll do is we'll go ahead and add a new application. It doesn't exist now. We'll call that also Dropbox. Dropbox runs over our web protocols 80 or 443. And so in this case, we're interested in sources within our network destined to Dropbox. Our group, this is going to run over TCP. And we'll go ahead and add that application. And then, very important, submit the changes.
Very good.
Verify the changes first, then submit.
It's a step that a lot of people forget, and then they're frustrated that they can't find the application. All right, so now let's go back over to our NTA summary and pop out our Flow Navigator, and let's take a look again at our interface that faces the public internet. So we'll look at a detail here for an interface that faces our public internet. And then let's look at our application that we've just created. So we'll use that type ahead here and find Dropbox. We'll add that filter and apply that filter.
Alphabetical type ahead.
Now, what would we expect to see here?
No data.
No data right now.
And that's a good thing in this case.
Very good thing.
Yeah.
Now, if we want to, we can go ahead and create an alert based on that, and we can say, if I do see any of this type of traffic, then I'm going to go ahead and add a threshold here over the last 5 minutes. I can go ahead and open that in the alert wizard, and I can go ahead and add an action to that just as we've done before.
That's fantastic. And this also gets you out of the game of network protocol whack-a-mole,
Exactly.
where you have to wait for the problem to occur and then set up your alert for it. You can proactively, predictively go and say, and I shouldn't see this, and this, and this, and this, and get all your ducks in a row when you start out.
So this could be a whole set of protocols that we're concerned about from a security perspective in terms of data leakage out of the network. Or it could be other types of non-business traffic that we expect not to see.
Fantastic.
So I just want to be clear that this is only the stuff that's in NTA. So when you look at the entire suite of network monitoring solutions,
there'd be enough for a whole episode, which is exactly what the next episode is about next month.
Right. We know that once we open the topic to NPM and NCM and all the rest of the gang, it's going to suck all the oxygen out of the room. So we wanted to make sure that NTA had its own time to shine.
That's right. And that's based on your feedback. And of course, one of the great ways to give us feedback is to interact with us live. And hopefully over here to the right, you see the chat window so that we can take your questions live on air. But if you don't, well, that means you're not live with us. So swing by our homepage, which is lab.solarwinds.com. Take a look at upcoming episodes and make sure you're with us live so that we can talk to you in real time.
Right.
That about it?
That's it.
Awesome. So for SolarWinds Lab, I'm Patrick Hubbard.
I'm Joe Reves.
And I'm Leon Adato. Thanks for watching.